Mohawk Motors. My name is Jason. Today, we're gonna get the bottom end assembled on the 6-liter LQ4 engine for our Blue Crew cab build. Let me show you how we do this thing. Okay, so if you followed in the previous videos, we've got this essentially a completely stripped block. There's nothing left in it but the freeze plugs. Everything else has been removed. The first thing we need to do is get the new cam bearings installed. I ordered a set of Clevite bearings. These are standard camshaft bearings for an LQ4 engine. Now, as I mentioned before, if you've never installed camshaft bearings before and you're not 100% confident in your ability to do it, take it to a professional and let them do it for you. You'll remember that I said before they go in a specific order. Most bearing manufacturers will put that order somewhere on the packaging. Each bearing has a part number, and Clevite notes the part number and the position in the block. So we're gonna follow that order. We're gonna get these cam bearings pressed back in. Now inside your cam bearing, there's 2 oil holes. Now in this engine, there's only 1 oil feed, and the oil feed is on odd numbered side of the block and about the 10:30, 11 o'clock position. So it's very important that you get that oil hole lined up. Now it's also very important, you'll see in the bearing, my 2 oil holes are here at my fingertips. We want to put the large surface of the bearing that doesn't have any feed holes at the bottom of the cam bearing bore, so that is where the majority of the pressure will be pushing against the camshaft. So installation is opposite of removal. Start at the rear of the engine and work your way forward using your bearing installation tool. We've got our cam bearings installed. We've got good clearance on our cam bearings. You probably saw in the time lapse there, I was putting the camshaft in and out and then using some Scotch-Brite to rub on the cam bearings. I don't have a set of inside micrometers in order to take a reading on the bearing inside clearance and then check it against the camshaft. So I do it by feel. And a lot of people say that's bogus, there's no way, yada, yada, yada. It's worked for me. So I could feel that it was tight on the number 2 and the number 4. So I used my Scotch-Brite pad to just ever so gently just run around on the inside of that bearing to open it up a little bit. And now I have clearance that I'm happy with all the way in. The cam goes in nicely the way it should. Cam goes out nicely the way it should. And that's dry. So when I put it in with oil, I'm confident everything will be fine. So next we need to get our upper main bearings installed and then get the crankshaft set in place. And then we'll do a little bit of clearance check with Plastigauge to make sure that our crankshaft main bearing clearance is where it should be. There we go. Okay, let's see here. Now it looks like we're right at 3 thousandths. 2 thousandths is just a tiny bit bigger, so we're right at 3 thousandths clearance. That's where I want to be. So I'll get the Plastigauge cleaned off of there, crank out, smother it in assembly lube, and then stick it all back together. Got our crankshaft in. All of our bearing clearances are where we want them to be. Both the main bearing clearance is nice, about 3 thousandths. Our front to back, our end play clearance is good. It's at about 2.5, 3 thousandths. And everything spins over smoothly by hand. I've got all the main caps fully torqued. And like I said, it spins over nice and smooth by hand the way it should. So if this is going to be your first time doing this, I reused the main bolts. Some people say, no, they're a torque to yield bolt. You can't reuse them. It's not my experience. I've been perfectly fine reusing main bolts before. The outside bolts here that go through the block and into the main caps, I seal those with a little bit of liquid Teflon thread sealant on the thread, and then a little bit of ultra gray silicone on the shoulder of the bolt where it goes against the block. I've always done them like that, and I haven't had any of them start leaking yet. And they all seem to, stay torqued and stay where they belong. I'm using Permatex Ultra Slick Assembly lubricant, and next step up is to start getting these pistons and connecting rods back in. So this is going to be my catchphrase, but assembly is the opposite of disassembly. Put your piston rings back on, and then your new rod bearings in. I'm going to be assembling with new ARP connecting rod bolts. Connecting rod bolts are pretty much the only bolts I won't reuse, because if you have a connecting rod bolt fail, your engine's, it's almost guaranteed to be trashed. So I'm not willing to take a chance on that, but all the other torque to yield bolts in the engine, the main bolts, the head bolts, etc., I'll reuse those. So, like I said, let's flip this thing over and start getting these pistons and rods back in. I'm going to start with number 1 and just work my way back just like I did taking it apart. Last one. I'm not gonna lie, y'all. This felt like it took a long time. So as I put these all together, rather than put one in, flip it over, torque it, flip it back, put the next one in, flip it over, torque it, flip it back. I put all of them in and just ran the connecting rod bolts up to the shoulders. I haven't actually tightened any of them yet. So now I'll flip the engine over and torque all the bolts. Now, ARP recommends a bolt stretch gauge for torque. I don't have a bolt stretch gauge. And in the absence of a bolt stretch gauge, ARP recommends 45 foot-pounds. So that's what we're going to go with. Now, a tip, if you've never assembled anything like this before is torque one and then rotate the engine. Torque the next and then rotate the engine. And make sure you've rotated it before you torque any of them. So now I can feel the drag of the pistons and the piston rings sliding up and down the cylinder walls, but there's no bearing drag. So as I torque these down, and like I said, I'll torque number one, then I'll rotate the engine. Make sure it doesn't feel any tighter, any pinching, any binding, anything like that. Then 2 and repeat. 3, repeat. 4, repeat. Working my way back. That way, if there's something wrong and one of these is tight for whatever reason and is causing a bind, I'll know which one it is now as I'm doing it, rather than I get the whole thing put together and then I have to go back and figure out which one of these connecting rods and connecting rod bearings is tight. It's also important to remember these are cracked rods. So you gotta make sure that your two halves of the connecting rod are lined up right, because they only go together in one exact, specific, perfect way. So let's torque number one. Okay, number one is torque. Now I'll wipe the sides of number two so I can see that it's lined up as I'm rotating the engine over, and make sure I don't feel any more resistance than I did before. Number two looks good also. I'm going to go all the way around. Alright, I don't feel any more resistance than before, so I'm going to go ahead and torque number two. There we go. I'm going to rotate the engine. Everything still feels smooth and nice the way it should. Everything looks good. So next I'll do number three. Rod is lined up. Torque number three. Spin the engine. Spins over nicely. That's it. Wash, rinse, repeat till you get all your rod bolts torqued to spec. There we go. Everything spins over smoothly. No binding. Doesn't feel any tighter now than it did before I started torquing the rod caps. So that's it. My rotating assembly is ready. All right, everybody. Well, we've got our rotating assembly completed in this engine. It spins over nicely. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Next time we'll work on getting the short block finished up, but it's getting late tonight, so I'm going to call that it for this video. I really appreciate all of you who watched. I appreciate everybody who has subscribed. If you'd like to subscribe, it helps me out. Leave any questions or comments you have down below. I'd love to hear from all of you. But until the next video, take care. Get in your little sleeping bag there, engine. Get you all tucked up nice and cozy.